Prior to his death, Pat Morita, star of Karate Kid, talked candidly about the true behind-the-scenes of the film that transformed his life. For years, Mr. Miyagi was the only person fans saw on screen calm and smart. However, few were aware of the hardships, close calls, and pivotal moments that nearly prevented him from ever assuming the part. Come along with us as we unearth the little-known tale of Pat Morita's struggle to become Mr. Miyagi and the information he disclosed about the Karate Kid earlier in life. The invisible barrier. People consider Mr. Miyagi to be smart, composed, and endowed with silent strength when they think of the Karate Kid. Pat Morita, however, had to overcome a barrier that nearly terminated his chances of landing the part before he became that iconic character. Morita could hardly be considered a significant actor in Hollywood at the time. He was primarily recognized as a humorous individual, a regular on sitcoms, and a stand-up comedian. Audiences adored his charm, timing, and sense of humor. Instead of being able to give profound, emotional performances, he was seen by them as the guy who made them laugh on programs like Happy Days. This picture of him stayed with me. People are often categorized by Hollywood. And getting out of one is very impossible once you're inside. Pat Morita's greatest challenge was the comedian label. He was unimaginable to executives and producers as a serious person. They needed Mr. Miyagi to be a mentor, a man with a history, a war veteran, and someone who held both wisdom and grief. They believed that Morita's background in humor made him the complete opposite. The first time his name was mentioned in relation to the Karate Kid, producer Jerry Weintraub immediately brushed it aside. According to reports, he stated that he did not want a comedian to get the part. He desired gravitas, a man who exuded weight by nature. Pat Morita couldn't be that guy, in Weintraub's opinion. He made a final decision. No chances, no auditions, not even a test. The notion of Pat Morita as Mr. Miyagi was absurd to Weintraub. Morita's name was consistently ignored for weeks. It was eliminated before it could even be debated each time it showed up on a list of potential actors. He didn't seem to fit in with serious roles, as if Hollywood itself had chosen. This was quite disheartening for Pat. His previous success in comedy had turned into a curse, despite his lifelong efforts to be seen and accepted seriously. He was unable to play the one role that would really showcase his abilities because of it. Although Weintraub steadfastly refused, director John Avildsen, who had previously established Rocky as a classic, had a different idea. The Karate Kid, in his opinion, was more than just a fighting film. It dealt with sorrow, healing, and mentoring. To him, Daniel and Miyagi's relationship was fundamental to the narrative. He had little interest in well-known figures or stereotypes. On cinema, he desired humanity and truth. Avildsen started to retaliate silently. He requested that the casting crew try out every potential actor, including ones the producers were not interested in seeing. It was his method of allowing for unforeseen talent. Sometimes the right person doesn't fit the criteria, and he knew that. He was interested in seeing what each performer might offer. Pat Morita was among them. However, the procedure took a long time. Using extensive lists of actors who sounded the character, looked the part, or had the kind of dramatic background Hollywood trusted, Weintraub and the studio looked everywhere else. Morita's name was never taken seriously and was always a background murmur. Casting directors attempted to persuade Weintraub to give him a chance. But often, the producer declined. In the end, Avildsen's perseverance paid off. He demanded Morita be given the opportunity to try out, even if it was only as a formality. Dozens of actors had already been spotted by that point, which was weeks later. At the very end of the list was Pat Morita. The why not option, the last name. It was never intended for him to enter the room. It was more about closing the book than it was about opening a door when they decided to let him try. However, everything would soon alter because of that one action and that one tiny chance. Morita would move from being a forgotten comic to one of the most adored instructors in film history at that very moment. By then, however, no one was aware of it. Pat himself believed it to be just another dead end, as did everyone else. Pat Morita was in the midst of a slump in his career when he was eventually called to audition. He was worn down by years of rejection. Finding positions that allowed him to showcase his depth had been difficult, so he had been taking on tiny jobs to make ends meet. It no longer seemed like a calling to act. There seemed to be no end in sight to the lengthy journey. All of that weight was on his shoulders as he entered the audition room. He didn't think he would be selected. He didn't even believe that anyone in the room had faith in him. But knowing that he had to try, he went nevertheless. He gave it his all, knowing that this would be the last time he was rejected, even if it was another one. For Morita, that one opportunity was more than a tryout. It was an optimistic moment. It served as evidence that life can occasionally push a door open even after humans have closed it. The chance itself was unique, and he realized that perhaps, just possibly, it was meant for him. He had no idea what was going to happen to him that day. Not only was it a career turning point, but it also completely changed the way the world would perceive him. Before long, everything would begin to alter in a weird audition room with just one man looking in one camera. The test with a single camera. When Pat Morita eventually entered the Karate Kid audition room, he anticipated the typical Hollywood scene. There are a few people seated at a table, a clipboard in the hands of someone, and possibly a camera mounted across the room. He entered a nearly vacant area instead. Only one man was waiting for him, and the room was silent and devoid of any potential distractions. The filmmaker is John Avildsen. However, that day, Avildsen didn't appear to be your typical director. A bulky battery pack was slung around him, and a camera was strapped on his shoulder. Would go on to say that he was part machine and half man. It was an odd sight that immediately altered the atmosphere of the situation. Although he did not lower the camera, Avildsen made a cordial introduction. He began recording as soon as Pat walked in. The arrangement was informal. When Pat had no one performing for him, it felt more like a test of his true characteristics. Avildsen was behind the camera, and Morita was in front of it. There were no casting assistants or producers. Initially, Pat was anxious. This was his one chance to prove that he was more than just a comedian, and he knew it. The quiet made him pay attention to every word and every gesture. However, that anxiety started to subside as the minutes went by. Avildsen did not rush him, nor did he direct or interrupt. He simply listened to Pat's words. Something unusual happened because of that little freedom. The performance became effortless. Morita did not aim to impress, he just shared himself. In his speech, he discussed his life, his hardships, and what it meant to be granted another shot. The man in front of the camera gradually relaxed his tense shoulders and stopped acting. He was just himself. Something unique became possible because of that serenity. Pat was worn out that day after years of struggling to be taken seriously, in addition to the travel. His speech was a sign of his weariness. He spoke in a low, cautious, hesitant voice. His phrases were more meaningful because of the pauses in between them than because of the contents. That innate weariness influenced the cadence of his speech, which would eventually come to characterize Mr. Miyagi's speech pattern. At once, Avildsen recognized it. It was not a polished performance that interested him. He desired truth, the type that was unavoidable. As a result, he continued to film. Pat was so unaware of the passing of time. After engaging in informal conversation, they transitioned into scripted scenes. A man standing in front of a lens, expressing years of spoken passion, was all that was present. No co-star, no set, no costume. When he was done, he thought the audition was over. Gathering his belongings, he prepared to leave. Something Avildsen remarked as he got to the door stopped him cold. "How about Pat? Would you not like to bring your script with you? You might need it." That one sentence changed everything. It wasn't said as a joke or a polite gesture. It was a clue, a quiet signal that Avildsen saw something in him that everyone else had missed. For the first time, Pat felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone believed he could do it. He didn't say much back, just smiled, nodded, and left the room with his heart racing. That was the moment he later described as the turning point, the second when he realized he might actually become Mr. Miyagi. What started as another desperate audition had become something deeper. He hadn't just played a character. He had revealed himself. After that day, John Avildsen knew he had found his Miyagi. But there was still one huge problem. Jerry Weintraub. The producer who had refused to even consider Pat was still convinced he wasn't right for the role. Avildsen decided to let the footage speak for itself. In a meeting with Weintraub and the other producers, he played the audition tape. The room was quiet as the screen came to life. There was Pat, not the comedian, not the man from Happy Days, but a calm, steady figure with a heavy presence. He wasn't delivering lines like an actor. He was speaking like someone who had lived them. The tired eyes, the soft tone, and the measured pauses, it all felt real. When the tape ended, there was silence. Then Weintraub broke it. He leaned forward and said, "Hey, wait a minute. That looks like Miyagi." Avildsen turned to him and replied, "That's Pat Morita, the one you didn't want to read for the part." It was the moment everything changed. The same man who had been dismissed without a chance was now the clear favorite. That single tape had broken through weeks of doubt and disbelief. Morita didn't have to fight anymore. The camera had done it for him. From that day on, no one in the room questioned if Pat could play Mr. Miyagi. They had seen it with their own eyes. The man they thought couldn't carry drama had carried the entire story in a few quiet minutes of proving he could be Miyagi. Winning over the room with one strong audition wasn't enough. After John Avildsen showed the tape and changed a few minds, the studio still wanted proof that Pat Morita could repeat that magic again and again. What followed was a string of 5 separate tests. Each session asked him to show the same focus, the same calm power, and the same depth. It wasn't about one lucky day anymore. It was about consistency and control, the words executives used to press their point. They wanted to be sure the performance would hold under pressure. On a busy set with long days and tight schedules. For Pat, this meant walking back into rooms that had once dismissed him and keeping steady each time. He had to perform scenes in different ways, take direction on the spot, and prove he could live inside Miyagi without slipping. The tests weren't flashy. They were focused on craft. Could he land the pauses? Could he carry pain without overplaying it? Could he guide the boy at the center of the story while staying grounded and quiet? With each pass, he showed he could. He didn't rush. He didn't push. He let the character breathe through him and gave the room what it needed to see. Reliability. Even with these wins, the mood around the tests was strict. Executives watched closely. They looked for cracks. But each time, Morita held the line. He showed the same presence that had moved Avildsen in the bare audition room. Piece by piece, the doubts started to loosen. What began as a plan to test him into failure turned into confirmation that he belonged. The third test raised the stakes. It was no longer just about Morita alone. The story lived or died on the connection between Mr. Miyagi and Daniel LaRusso, played by Ralph Macchio. So the next step was to see them together. Ralph flew in from New York, and the room shifted from a solo audition to a true screen test for chemistry. Their first reads were simple, a few lines, a few exchanges, but underneath the words, something important started to show. Morita's patience and calm gave Ralph room to be open and young and full of questions. Ralph's nervous energy gave Morita a reason to respond with care. The rhythm between them made the scenes feel natural. It didn't look rehearsed. It looked like two people meeting at the right time in their lives. As they moved to bigger scenes, the father-son dynamic revealed itself. Morita listened, and Ralph leaned in. The quiet humor landed without trying. The pauses filled with meaning. The words about chores, training, and respect felt real. In real time, the bond that would hold the film together formed in front of the camera. The team watching the monitor could see it. You can't fake trust, and trust is what began to glow between them. This was the anchor the movie needed. By the fourth test, the studio wanted to know if the image could match the feeling. They asked Morita to read in costume. He put on a simple GI. He kept the beard and hair that had already changed how people looked at him. He stood there not as a comedian trying to play serious, but as a man who looked like he had lived a life of work and loss. Ralph later said the transformation was immediate. He became Miyagi. It wasn't just the clothes. It was how Morita carried himself once he wore them. His posture changed, his eyes softened, but stayed alert. The room felt different, and even the doubters noticed. Costumes can help an actor, but here they unlocked something. The crew and executives started to see not just a strong audition, but a full character they could place into every scene of the film. Anxiety in the studio eased into quiet awe. People who had only seen a comedian began to respect the discipline in front of them. The more Morita settled into the look, the more the look disappeared and the man remained. That is what moved the room. The costume didn't make him Miyagi. It allowed everyone else to finally see the Miyagi that had been there the whole time. The fifth and final test removed every safety net. No set dressing. No score to lift emotion. No crowd to feed energy. Just a cold soundstage, a camera, and the two actors. It was a deliberate trial. If the heart of the story could survive this, it would survive anything. They played key moments. Morita kept his voice low and clear. Ralph responded, less as an actor reading lines and more as a boy finding someone to trust. The air in the room held steady. No one rushed to fill the silences, and those silences started to speak for them. The camera caught it all. The care in Morita's gaze. The way Ralph's shoulders dropped when he felt safe. And the small half-smiles that meant more than big speeches. When the scene ended, the room stayed still. People didn't need to talk. They had seen the truth on the monitor. This wasn't a gamble anymore. It was proof. The chemistry was there. The character was there. The film had found its core. With that final hush, the tests accomplished what they were meant to do. They showed that Pat Morita wasn't borrowing Miyagi for a moment. He was carrying him for an entire film. Next comes the call that changed everything. And the words no one expected the producer to say. Hall that flipped the room. When the final screen test ended, the studio room fell into silence. For the first time, even Jerry Weintraub, the man who had once said a comedian should never play Mr. Miyagi, was quiet. On the monitor in front of him, Pat Morita and Ralph Macchio had just delivered something that no one expected. The room had been filled with people ready to judge, but by the end, they were simply watching. What started as another cautious test turned into a quiet moment of understanding. Weintraub leaned forward, watching Pat's calm face on the screen. The man he had once dismissed as too funny was now bringing tears to people's eyes with almost no movement, no music, and no tricks. The final test scene, an emotional exchange between Miyagi and Daniel, didn't need anything extra. It was raw and real. Pat's voice carried the weight of a man who had lived through loss. Ralph's eyes showed trust and warmth. It felt like two people meeting through honesty, not acting. As the scene ended, no one clapped. No one spoke. That silence was the proof Avildsen had been waiting for. He had known from the first audition that Morita had the heart of Miyagi, but now everyone else could see it too. Weintraub sat back. Thoughtful, his mind had shifted. The producer who once refused to even let Morita audition was now faced with the undeniable truth. The film needed him. The tension in the room was gone. In its place was respect. That day marked a change in tone across the production. The disbelief that had followed Morita from one test to another finally cracked. Avildsen didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He knew that the tape and the performance had done the talking. Morita had not only earned the role, but he had also changed the atmosphere around the movie. The people who once saw him as a risk now understood he was the reason the film would work. While all this was happening, Pat Morita was at home. He didn't know what was being discussed, and no one had told him how the final test had gone. He had done his best and left it behind, trying not to think too much about it. Still, waiting was hard. Every actor knows that after an audition, silence can mean anything. Days of doubt can stretch forever when a career depends on one decision. Then the phone rang. On the other end was Jerry Weintraub. Pat didn't expect to hear from him personally. And when he realized who it was, he braced himself for bad news. But Weintraub's voice was different. No arrogance. No harsh tone. Instead, he spoke with a mix of honesty and humility. "Pat," he said, "I almost made the worst mistake of my life." There was a short pause before he continued. "I just want to be the first to congratulate you. You've got the part of Miyagi." For a moment, Pat didn't speak. The words hung there, heavy and unreal. Then he let out a quiet breath. After all the rejection, the endless tests and the doubts, it was done. He had the role. But his reaction wasn't loud or proud. There was no gloating. No, "I told you so." That wasn't his way. He simply thanked Weintraub and said how grateful he was for the chance. It was a calm victory built on patience and grace. Morita never spoke harshly about Weintraub afterward. In later interviews, he even said he respected the man for admitting he was wrong. To Pat, that call wasn't just good news. It was closure. It was proof that persistence could turn disbelief into respect, even in a business known for closing its doors too quickly. When he hung up, he sat for a long time in quiet thought. The role he had fought for was finally his, and he knew what it meant. It wasn't only about work. It was about being seen for who he truly was. The night of the drunk Miyagi scene for Pat Morita, one of the most powerful nights on the Karate Kid set, came during the filming of the drunk Miyagi scene. It was a quiet, emotional moment when Mr. Miyagi opened up about losing his wife and child while serving in World War II. The scene revealed the man behind the mentor, the pain, the loneliness, and the depth of the character. The studio was unsure about including it. Some executives thought it might slow down the film or confuse audiences who saw Miyagi as the calm teacher and not as someone broken by grief. But Pat fought for it. He believed the scene was essential. It showed who Miyagi truly was and explained the strength behind his calm. Without it, Miyagi would have been only a guide, not a man. On the night of filming, the set felt heavy. The crew dimmed the lights and the sound of crickets played faintly in the background. Pat didn't need much direction. He walked into the scene carrying decades of personal experience, his struggles as a comedian, his memories of wartime internment camps, and his journey through rejection in Hollywood. When the cameras rolled, he didn't act. He remembered. The performance was raw. His words came out broken and uneven, filled with quiet sorrow. When he finished, no one moved. The crew didn't clap. They didn't speak. They simply stood there, letting the weight of the moment settle. It was one of those rare times when everyone knew they had just witnessed something real. Pat later said that night meant more to him than any award he could have received. It proved to him the truth could outshine everything else: humor, fame, and expectation. Another moment that Pat loved came from the opposite end of the emotional scale, the fly and chopstick scene. It was one of the film's funniest sequences, where Miyagi calmly tries to catch a fly with chopsticks, as Daniel watches. On paper, it was a simple gag, but on set, it became something more. Pat played it with quiet focus, his eyes locked on the invisible fly as if it were the most serious task in the world. Ralph Macchio watched, half amused and half impressed, while trying to follow along. The laughter that came when Daniel succeeded wasn't planned. It was real. Both actors broke into genuine smiles, and the crew joined in. For Pat, that scene showed the true spirit of the Karate Kid. It wasn't about martial arts or competition. It was about patience, humor, and the small lessons that reveal character. He loved that the audience could laugh with Miyagi, not at him. He made sure the humor felt warm, never mocking. Later, he would say that the scene's balance of comedy and calm reminded him that even light moments can teach something lasting. Off-screen, Pat Morita wasn't just a co-star to Ralph Macchio. He became a mentor. Ralph was still a teenager during filming, trying to handle sudden fame and the pressure of leading a major movie. Pat noticed his uncertainty and quietly guided him through it. He talked to Ralph about patience, professionalism, and enjoying the process rather than chasing results. Their friendship grew naturally. Between takes, they often sat together, sharing food or stories. Pat would tell him about his life before acting, his struggles, and the lessons he'd learned along the way. Ralph listened, sometimes forgetting that this man had once been a stand-up comedian. Their connection off-camera mirrored what the audience would later see between Daniel and Miyagi. There was a sense of care and trust that couldn't be faked. Ralph would later say that his scenes with Pat worked because they were real. He wasn't pretending to look up to him. He truly did. In the early days of filming, some members of the crew still had doubts about Morita. They wondered if the comedian from Happy Days could pull off a serious role. But as production went on, that skepticism faded. Every day, Pat proved he wasn't playing a part. He was living it. He developed small rituals to stay grounded in Miyagi's mindset. Sometimes before shooting, he would quietly sit in a corner, mumbling short thoughts in Miyagi's tone to stay connected to the character. He also kept a calm presence on set, speaking softly and offering bits of advice or humor to the crew. Over time, people started coming to him with questions or just to talk. They called it getting Miyagi wisdom, half as a joke, but also because his calm answers often helped. By the time filming wrapped, the atmosphere around him had changed completely. The same crew who once doubted him now looked at him with respect and warmth. When the cameras stopped rolling and the production ended, Pat carried those quiet moments with him. The laughter from the chopstick scene, the tears from the drunk Miyagi night, and the bond with Ralph Macchio all stayed close to his heart. Those experiences reminded him that the movie's real magic wasn't in the big fight scenes or the famous crane kick. It was in the relationships and the truth shared between people. If you enjoyed this, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more behind-the-scenes Hollywood stories, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload.